Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. This time, we're going to be exploring a story about desperation and dreams and a deadly voyage across the Atlantic.
Sounds intense.
It is, it is. We'll be diving into the YouTube film Deadly Voyage, Ghanaian full movie. Have you seen this one?
I have, yeah. It's a tough watch, but really powerful film.
Yeah, it's not always an easy watch, but I think it raises some really important questions that we need to explore together.
Definitely. It really gets you thinking about the human side of migration. The choices people make when they feel they have absolutely no other options,
Yeah,
and the systems that often fail to protect the most vulnerable.
right. And we're going to unpack all of that. But for now, let's start where the film begins in the bustling port of Tema, Ghana.
Okay.
You can almost feel the energy of this place. It's a
Mhm.
vital economic hub. But for many young men, like Kingsley, the protagonist of our story, it represents a dead end.
Yeah, it's interesting how the film portrays that contrast, right? You have the
Yeah.
vibrancy of the port, all this activity and movement. But for Kingsley and his friends, it's a place of stagnation. They're trapped by poverty with very limited opportunities.
And then comes this twist of fate, almost like something out of a movie itself. One of Kingsley's friends wins the lottery.
Oh, wow.
Suddenly, that dream of a better life in America, a life they'd almost given up on, seems within reach.
It makes you wonder what you would do in that situation.
Oh, absolutely.
Imagine having that sudden windfall, knowing it could be your ticket out of a desperate situation. The film doesn't shy away from the moral gray areas here.
Right.
These young men resort to bribery to get passage on a cargo ship.
Wow.
A ship called the stowaways, which is kind of ironic considering.
Well, considering their journey is anything but a fairy tale, right?
Exactly.
This is where we start to see the naive hope of these young men clash with the brutal realities of what they're about to face.
Yeah, because stowing away on a cargo ship, this isn't a cruise. These ships aren't designed for passengers, especially not hidden ones. The conditions are harsh, the risks are enormous. You're at the mercy of a crew who may not be too happy about your presence.
And speaking of the crew, let's talk about the characters we meet on board this ship. We've got a fascinating mix of personalities. You've got the captain, a former Soviet officer who's clearly wrestling with some inner demons.
I found the captain really fascinating. This internal conflict he has. He's obviously a man who has seen things, perhaps done things that weigh very heavily on him.
Yeah.
And now he's caught in this moral dilemma. On the one hand, he has a responsibility for the safety of his crew and the ship. On the other hand, he's under immense pressure from the company to deliver the goods no matter the cost.
And then there's Mr. Blackos, that shadowy figure representing the shipping company. He's almost like the embodiment of a system that prioritizes profit over everything else.
Yeah, he's chillingly indifferent to the human cost of his actions.
It's almost as if the film is asking us to consider the bigger picture here. What happens when individuals are caught in systems that incentivize certain behaviors, even harmful ones?
Yeah.
How much agency do we really have when faced with those pressures?
It's a really good question. And the film brings that tension to life as we go deeper into the stowaways' experience.
Okay.
It's claustrophobic the way they're crammed into this airless cargo hold. The fear of discovery is constant, and the way some of the crew members treat them is brutal.
It's hard to imagine what that must be like.
It makes you wonder, how much can a person actually endure?
But amidst that darkness, there are these moments of humanity. We see a crew member named Yuri who risks his own safety to bring them food and water. He shows them compassion when others choose cruelty.
That's right. And that makes the captain's eventual decision even more devastating.
Yeah.
Torn between his responsibility for his crew and the pressure from the company, he makes a choice that seals the fate of the stowaways. He orders the hold sealed, essentially condemning them to death by suffocation.
It's a gut-wrenching moment.
It is.
And it really forces us to confront the weight of choices, especially when made under such extreme pressure. We're going to explore the ramifications of that decision in our next part, but before we do, I'm curious what stands out to you so far about this film.
Well, I think it's hard to shake that feeling of helplessness,
Yeah.
pervading those scenes in the cargo hold. You see these young men full of dreams and aspirations reduced to just fighting for their very survival.
It's a powerful reminder of the human cost of these desperate journeys. It makes the captain's decision even more impactful. You mentioned his inner conflict earlier, but what I find particularly interesting is how the film portrays the crew's reactions to his decision. Oh, yeah. Some just follow orders without question, while others seem visibly disturbed. But ultimately, they do nothing to stop it. It makes you think about the dynamics of power and obedience in these situations.
That's a good point. It would be easy to just label the captain as the villain of the story. But the film complicates that by showing us that broader context. We see the pressure he's under from the company and how that pressure trickles down to the crew. It raises the question, how much are we all products of the systems we operate within?
Absolutely. And it also makes me think about the concept of moral compromise. What are those moments in our own lives, maybe on a smaller scale, where we've had to make those difficult choices? Choices that maybe compromised our values in some way. It's something we don't like to admit to ourselves. But this film kind of forces us to confront that uncomfortable reality.
Yeah, and the film doesn't let anyone off the hook. Even after the tragic consequences of his decision become clear, Mr. Blackos is still fixated on profits. He shows very little remorse for the loss of life. It's just a chilling reminder that in some systems, human life is expendable, just a statistic in the pursuit of economic gain.
But amidst this tragedy, there's a flicker of hope, right? Kingsley, against all odds, manages to escape that sealed cargo hold.
His escape is harrowing, almost unbelievable.
It really is.
It speaks to the incredible resilience of the human spirit that will survive even in the face of unimaginable adversity.
And it fuels his determination to seek justice. He could have easily just disappeared into the anonymity of New York City, but he chooses to confront those responsible for the deaths of his friends.
Yeah, his journey to New York and his confrontation with the captain and first mate is incredibly powerful. Here's this young man having endured unimaginable trauma, standing up to authority and demanding accountability.
It's a moment that makes you think about the pursuit of justice. What does it mean to achieve justice in a situation like this? Is it even possible?
That's where the film brilliantly leaves us with an ambiguous ending. We see the confrontation, we hear Kingsley's accusations, but we don't get a neat resolution.
Right.
It doesn't tell us whether anyone is ultimately held accountable for what happened.
And I think that ambiguity is intentional. It forces us to sit with the complexities of these issues. The fact that there aren't always easy answers or clear-cut villains.
Exactly. It invites us to continue the conversation beyond the confines of the film, to think about how these themes of desperation, moral compromise, and systemic injustice play out in the real world.
And that's what I think makes this film so powerful. It's not just entertainment, it's
Yeah.
a catalyst for reflection and dialogue. It challenges us to examine our own roles, our own choices in the systems that we're a part of.
Yeah. It really does leave you with a lot to think about. And I think that's where the real power of stories lies, right? They take us to places that we might not otherwise go, make us feel things we might not otherwise feel. And hopefully, ultimately, they can inspire us to act.
Absolutely. I
Oh,
totally agree.
you're-
You know, it's not about providing simple answers or telling people what to think.
Yeah.
It's about, sparking that internal conversation, the wrestling with those really difficult questions and hopefully, that desire to make a difference in the world. As we've been discussing the desperation of Kingsley and his friends and the captain's moral dilemma and even the chilling indifference of Mr. Blackos, I keep thinking about something that isn't explicitly shown in the film, but it's so central to this whole narrative.
I'm curious, what's that?
The families left behind, the mothers and fathers and siblings, children, all of those left wondering, hoping, praying for the safe return of their loved ones.
Yeah, the ripple effect of these journeys, the human cost that extends far beyond just those who actually embark on the voyage.
Exactly. Their stories are often invisible, right? Their grief unseen. But it's such a profound part of this larger reality.
Yeah.
It makes you realize that the cost of these journeys, the human cost, is immeasurable.
It reminds us that these stories aren't just these abstract concepts or plot points in a film. They're about real people, real lives, real families that are torn apart by circumstances that are often beyond their control.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final question. We've explored a lot of darkness and despair, the systemic forces that drive people to make these desperate choices. But what about hope? What can we do as individuals, as a global community, to create a world where journeys like Kingsley's are no longer necessary?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I don't think there's one simple answer, but I think it starts with awareness, empathy, a willingness to understand how complex these issues really are.
Yeah, it's about looking beyond just the headlines and seeing the human faces and the individual stories that make up this larger narrative.
And taking action, however small it might seem. Maybe it's, supporting organizations that are working to create economic opportunities in developing countries. Maybe it's advocating for more humane immigration policies, or maybe it's as simple as just having these conversations with our friends and families and challenging our own biases and assumptions.
Right? Every step we take, every voice we raise can contribute to a shift in the tide. Because ultimately, this isn't just about stowaways on a ship. It's about our shared humanity and our responsibility to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to live a life of dignity and hope.
Well said. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some new perspectives, some things to think about, and maybe even a little spark of inspiration to go out and make a difference.